natal chart rectification and the planetary Yamsheyan. Now, there is a technique at the Committee of Ancient Astronomical Mathematics when it comes to advanced natal astrology that we utilize when confirming whether or not the ascendant, the tropical ascendant for the native is correct or not. So for example, if somebody was born and their time of birth indicates that their ascendant is Gemini, then before delineating the chart, what we would do is we look at events that would have taken place in the native's life in the past, and then we ask if these events took place within the native's life, and the native will answer yes or no. This therefore confirms whether or not the ascendant is actually Gemini or not. All right? And how do we do this? We look at planetary cycles, and it's a technique called the Planetary Yamsheyan. What is the Planetary Yamsheyan? The Planetary Yamsheyan is the ability for the astronomical mathematician to be able to calculate the transits of Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto without the use and or need of astrological software or even the ephemeris. All right? We calculate these transits within our mind and are able to do so within, well, through over a period of 200 years, from about, say, 2040, not 2040, from about 1930 or thereabouts up until about 2060. And this can be done. And you don't need software to do it. You don't need to look at the planetary tables, ephemeris. You don't need to look at that. You can do it in your mind. And there's a way of doing that if you understand geometrically the cycles of the planets. So, example here. I'll give you a story of what took place when I utilized this technique. Now, back in 2019, there was an acquaintance of mine who I bumped into while I was on the street. And we got talking and we were speaking about astrology. And he said he knows that he's a Sagittarius. He told me the date he was born, but I can't remember the exact date at this point in time. But he knows for a fact he's Sagittarius, but he didn't know what time he was born. Now, he said he is aware that his time of birth was around 1700 hours and 30 minutes, or between 1700 hours and 30 minutes and 1800 hours, yeah, and that he's Sagittarius. So for me, being an astronomical mathematician and a practitioner of KhemAstroMath, I thought, okay, you know what? If you are Sagittarius and you know your time of birth is between 1700 hours and 30 minutes and 1800 hours, I know at the geographic latitude where we were standing, London, UK, is 52 north. And therefore, Sagittarius at that time, when the sun is in Sagittarius, sunrise is around 0700 hours and 45 minutes. And sunset is around 1600 hours and 45 minutes. All right. I know that. And therefore, if sunset is around 1600 hours and 45 minutes, and the person I was speaking to, my acquaintance, said he was born between 1700 hours and 30 minutes and 1800 hours, I know that at 1600 hours and 45 minutes, Gemini would rise, which is the opposite sign from Sagittarius. Because that's the time that the sun would set, 1600 hours and 45 minutes, and therefore the opposite sign 180 degrees away from Sagittarius is Gemini. All right? Gemini will be rising 1600 hours and 45 minutes. And at this geographic latitude, Gemini rises for, it takes 107 minutes for Gemini to rise, which is 1 hour and 47 minutes. So therefore, if you have 1600 hours and 45 minutes, then you add 1700 hours and 45 minutes. That is 1 hour. So therefore, between 1700 hours and 30 minutes and 1800 hours, for this particular person who is a Sagittarius, it's likely that he is a Gemini ascendant. Now, mind you, I did this in my head, deducing it based upon knowing the rising times of the sign of Gemini and the time of sunrise and sunset when the sun is in Gemini. Sorry, when the sun is in Sagittarius. So I already deduced and said, right, within like, it took me about a few seconds, and I said, you must be a Gemini ascendant if you're born in between 1700 hours and 30 minutes and 1800 hours. So then I proceeded and said, right, I employed a technique known as the Planetary Yamsheyan, where I calculated the transit of Saturn within his nativity in relation to Gemini being on the ascendant to ascertain if Gemini was indeed his true ascendant. And I asked him and I said, what's your earliest memory of when you moved house? And if not your earliest memory, when was the most challenging time that you faced in relation to your domestic environment, which could have involved a house move or even the end of your relationship with your home, and or even the death of a parent? And he said his earliest memory of moving house, which was the most challenging time that he remembered of moving house, was around 1980. So I said to him, 1980, was it at the beginning of 1980 or at the end of 1980? And he said it was at the beginning of 1980, but the whole process began in 1979. So therefore, I concluded that he must be a Gemini ascendant based upon him having an experience of a challenging time in relation to his domestic dwelling that began around 1979 and continued into 1980. Why? How do I know this? Because if Gemini is on the ascendant, then the fourth sector, fourth house, fourth sector is therefore Virgo. I know based upon mental calculation that Zohal, Saturn, transited the fourth house, Virgo, between 1977 and 1980. And thus, that would correspond with a challenging time that he would have experienced within his life in relation to his home environment. All right. I then proceeded to ask further questions to make sure and or confirm that his ascendant was Gemini. So I asked him and I said, did you experience a major change that took place in your life in relation to your relationships? Did you have a major relationship development within your life which coincided with a lot of legal documentation and paperwork that you needed to deal with to do with your living situation, which changed in a major way, which is very likely to have involved you having to have greater responsibilities regarding child rearing, having a child, moving house, and a major development in terms of your relationships? And did this take place around 2016? Around 2016-ish. And did that take place just after you went through major upheavals to do with your relationship? Around 2015 to 2016, major upheavals in terms of your relationship in relation to responsibility with a child, as well as then a change that would have taken place in terms of your living situation. And he said, yes. He said that he went through a relationship breakup with someone who he has a child with and moved out and was no longer living with them, and that the process took place around between 2015, around 2015-ish to 2017. He confirmed that. I also asked him and I said, now, before I move on, I explained how that was done. We can look and see that between 2015 and 2017, that Zohal, Saturn, would have been going for the 7th. Yeah? And the 7th being Sagittarius at the time he was born. So Saturn would have been going through Sagittarius between 2015 and 2017. And in 2016, Jupiter would have been in the 4th. Jupiter in Virgo in detriment. And the 4th representing the home will represent documentation, paperwork, and issues to do with what? Well, to do with the house or houses that Jupiter rules. Jupiter rules the 7th. So therefore, issues to do with his living space in relation to his relationship. Yeah. And then coming into 2015, 16-ish, Jupiter would have went into the 5th, and the 5th represents children. Understand? Now, that is the planetary Yamsheyan. Speaking of, and being able to calculate the transits of Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto without having to refer to ephemeris or even having to use astrological software. You can calculate this in your mind. Now, I know a lot of astrologers who may be listening will take this into consideration and utilize this technique by utilizing astrological software to carry out the calculations rather than going through the rigorous training to be able to calculate it within their mind. All right. And I know that this will happen because the large majority of human beings on this planet would rather decrease the work that they need to do in order to get the best results. Isn't that the rule of nature? Maximum reward, minimum effort. But I'm letting you know that you can learn how to calculate planetary transits within your mind if you take the time to study planetary motion. Planetary motion, understanding how it works. Yeah. I once had a student who came to me and wanted to know, well, they wanted to learn astrology, wanted me to teach them. First, they weren't sure what time they were born. They gave me the time they were born, and again, it was a Gemini ascendant. At the time, it was like around, it was 2019 again. And I said to them, between 2015 to 2017, did you go through a relationship breakup? She said, yes, I went through divorce and I'm still going through it. All right. I said, did you have a major change in terms of your living space between 2007 and 2009? She said, yes. All right. Again, that's just the motion of Saturn, being able to calculate that in your mind and therefore see when he's within certain positions which correspond to certain life areas and ask the person to confirm and or deny whether it took place. Now, she asked me and said, how were you able to calculate that? I said, I'm looking at the motion of Saturn. And she said, how are you able to calculate the position of Saturn so quickly in your mind and then ask me the question without using software? I said, because I understand the geometric motion of the planet Saturn and where he would have been, where he is and where he would be, all right, from past, present and future. And she said, all right, so how long does Saturn stay in one sign? And I said, Saturn, the average time he stays in one sign is 2.5 years. But this is not always the case. Sometimes it's 3 years. Sometimes it's just over 2. It depends. And she said, okay, so if it's 2.5 years, can you just look at where Saturn is today and then go to a year in the past and project where he would be on average to find out where he would be, where he would have been and where he would be in the future? And I said, no, you cannot do that. She said, why? I said, because his motion is not uniform. Sometimes he slows down in his speed. Sometimes he speeds up. The time that he is retrograde has an effect upon how long it takes for him to move, how long he stays in one sign. And those retrograde motions and the speed that he's moving and how long it takes him to traverse the whole entire ecliptic varies in terms of how long he stays in particular areas. Even though it takes him 29.5 years to traverse the whole 360 degrees of the zodiac, the time he spends in each sign varies. Why? Because the boundaries of the zodiac exist within our minds, all right? And the zodiac, therefore, tropically, is fixed, does not move. Each sign, each sector is 30 degrees. 12 of those making 360 degrees. But Saturn, Zohal, is walking through each of those signs, and he goes retrograde at certain intervals. Yeah. But sometimes he retrogrades over the cusp of a sign, and sometimes he retrogrades while he's inside a sign, due to the geometric motion that he takes, which is, from our perspective, more or less constant. But as he is traversing the zodiac and going retrograde and going forward, going retrograde and going direct and traversing each of those signs, there is another motion that's taking place with Saturn, which is slowly rotating and changing with regards to where he would be within the zodiac in relation to each of the signs when he goes retrograde or direct. This motion is not fixed and is rotating very slowly, and thus what ends up happening is, when you have the great conjunctions of Saturn and Jupiter, they slowly move backwards in terms of where the great conjunction would take place as a result of that. Now that is getting into another conversation about the way planets move, operate, function, the way they go retrograde, and the overall motion in terms of the geometric motion that they have in relation to the zodiac. Their geometric motion is not fixed, but the zodiac is, and hence, even though it takes them an average time to traverse the whole entire zodiac, which seems constant, you would expect, therefore, deduced that the time they spend in each sign will be the same, but it is not, due to their speed changing, due to that geometric motion not being fixed. Now, I know that I may be talking above certain people's heads, but if you took the time to painstakingly look at the ephemeris and look at the positions of Saturn over, say, a 200-year period, and study his motion, say, go from 1940 all the way up to 2060, and make a note of how long he stays in one sign, when he ingresses into a sign, how long he stays within that sign, how long he goes retrograde, make a note of all of that over a 200-year period, then you'll begin to see the pattern emerge and see what's actually happening in terms of the way he's moving and his motion. Then you'll see that there's actually a pattern which will allow you to calculate where he would be in the future, where he is now, and where he would have been in the past. All right. Now, I said to my student at the time, his motion is not uniform. Saturn is not uniform in terms of his motion. You have to study and look at his motion over a prolonged period of time so you can see the pattern. And she said, why can't you just give me the answer? I said, I'm giving you the answer. If I was to explain it to you geometrically now, you would not understand what I'm talking about, because you have to see the motion. Your mind has to see it. It can't be explained in words. And if I explain it in words, it won't sound like anything that makes any type of cohesive sense to you, because you haven't seen or studied his position. By studying the motion of planets within ephemeris, what ends up happening is you learn the nature of the cycle. How do you get to know someone? The planets, as far as I'm concerned, as far as KhemAstroMath is concerned, the planets are alive. They are beings. How do you get to know someone who is alive? You spend time with them. You get to learn their habits. You get to learn their ways. Yeah? So, by studying the motions of the planets, you learn their behavior. You learn their ways. You spend time with them. And as a result of having this understanding, and therefore being able to have this information within your mind, and thus being able to calculate planetary transits within your mind, when you are looking at a natal chart, or any chart, but especially natal charts, you are speaking directly with the planet, because you're calculating the planet's motion within your mind. So rather than you looking at someone's, say for example, someone has an ascendant of Leo, and you want to know and you want to confirm whether or not the tropical ascendant of Leo is correct. Now, I know straight away, I look and I'll be like, right, you must have went through major changes with your domestic environment around 2012, and at the same time it would have corresponded with a major development in terms of your job. you're likely to have gotten a new job around 2012 at the same time that you moved house, and then the year later, 2013, there should have been a major increase in terms of your money and your finances due to the job improvement that took place the year before. They will confirm or deny whether or not that took place. Yeah. Now, I do that based upon knowing the motion of Saturn and Jupiter and where they would have been at certain times of the year. Yeah. Well, at certain times in certain years. But what I'm stressing here is that by knowing what the ascendant is and being able to calculate where the positions of Saturn, Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto were, are, or would be, you are directly speaking to the planets in the heavens who are alive, who are beings. You are showing them courtesy to speak to them directly rather than via a computer. All right? The process. When you're looking at a natal chart and then you open up your computer and you load up the software to find out what transits are happening, what you are basically doing is saying, I'm not going to speak to you planets directly. I'm going to open up my computer, speak to my computer, and allow my computer to capture your auric magnetic field, and then allow the computer to decipher your information, your magnetic field, put it on the screen, and then you're reading the signatures of these planets via your computer, yeah, via your software. So a filtration process takes place, gets lost in translation. Lost in translation. What do I mean? Well, the planets are speaking directly, and they speak, and if you're using software and you're not calculating the transits in your mind, then the planets are speaking directly to your computer. At that point, that is one step of translation. The planetary magnetic auric signatures are being translated and projected into your astrological software. And then the astrological software takes all that magnetic energy, puts it into the random access memory, read-only memory, RAM and ROM, projects it onto the screen as RAM. At that point, there is a piece of the essence of what the planets are saying that is lost during that process, and then you are translating what you see from the computer screen with regards to the planet's essence, which has been slightly dwindled and lost due to that first step of translation. And then what ends up happening is you read what's on the screen, and that's another step of translation. So you have two steps of translation, and during those two steps there's a piece of the essence that is lost from what the planets are saying. Hence, what you find is astrologers who can calculate the ascendant in their mind and can calculate planetary positions in their mind tend to be much more skilled than astrologers who utilize astrological software, because the planets are speaking directly to the astrologer. When you calculate in your mind, the planets speak directly to you. So that's one step of translation. They're speaking to you directly. Yeah. It's like somebody speaking a language that is foreign to you. You don't understand what they're saying. And then you have somebody who is a native speaker of that particular language. And then they translate what that person is saying into your language. So for example, if you have somebody speaking Arabic and you can't understand Arabic, and then you get somebody who's a native speaker of Arabic to act as a translator, translate what the person is saying in Arabic, and then translate that to English, and then speak to you and translate what they're saying. Something will get lost in translation because the translator will have to try and find equivalent words in English that are equivalent to words that are spoken in Arabic. And there are some words that cannot be translated into English without being changed and or watered down in some way due to the limitations between languages. See what I mean? Now, if you can speak in this situation, if you can speak Arabic, you can directly converse with the person who's speaking it. And this is similar to with the planets. You can speak directly with the planets if you learn their language. And the language of the planets is geometry. You learn the geometry of the planet's motion. Then you learn the language of the planets, how they move, because they speak in geometry. And therefore, when you can calculate planetary transits and mentally calculate planetary transits in your mind and superimpose that over a astrological chart, you are therefore fluent within the language of geometry, which is the language that the planets speak, and therefore they will speak directly to you, and you'll be more accurate and fluent when it comes to reading the chart. All right, I have to stress that that is very important. All right, now let me give you another example. Another example is, there was someone who I know who was born on July the 7th, 1964, and he didn't know what time he was born. So I said to him, right, when was the most challenging time that you experienced in terms of relationship upheavals? And he said it was between 2001 and 2003. And I said, instantly I can already see what the ascendant is in my mind. I can instantly see what the ascendant is in my mind. And I said to him, wow, okay, did you go through a major change in relation to your living situation, which also involved you having to be responsible for a child between 1994 and 1996? He said, yes, that's when he said that's when he had a child, and that's when he moved out of his childhood home where he had been living all the way from his childhood up until 1994. All right, again, Saturn and Jupiter is all I was looking at within my mind to calculate that. All right, and it's knowing the geometry of those planets which allows the astronomical mathematician and or astrologer to be able to converse directly with the planets within the heavens geometrically to understand their language. All right, and this also helps with intuition, because in that example that I just gave, this person born 1964, we know in 1963 that Jupiter was in Aries. And if this person's ascendant, from what I can see, Sagittarius, what I calculated, that Jupiter would have been going from Aries into Taurus, Aries being the 5th from Sagittarius. Yeah. So knowing that Jupiter natally was placed within the cusp of Aries, not Aries to Sagittarius, Aries to Taurus, and knowing that in 1994 that Jupiter was in the 1st, Sagittarius, and Saturn was going through the 4th, we can say that this person is likely to have moved house in relation to a child. See what I mean? That's what I mean. But Jupiter in the ascendant and Zohel, Saturn in the 4th, could manifest as a number of different things. How do you know which type of manifestation it is within physical reality? How you know is via your intuition and your experience, the pattern recognition, but also as a result of being able to speak directly with the planets within the sky as a result of understanding the language of geometry. And that also helps with your intuition and accuracy. So I'm stressing here. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. That is natal astrology and the planetary Yamsheyan. It's called the Planetary Yamsheyan. Yamsheyan being a play on the Arabic word for walk or walking. Planetary Yamsheyan, the planets walking, the walking planets, the planets walking through the Arab, Baruj, the planets walking through the zodiac. Yeah. Like Another example, there was someone who had someone who has ascendant of Aries. Yeah. And I therefore asked them to confirm. I said, did you have a change in terms of your living situation between 2003 and 2005? And at the same time, was there an unexpected event which took place and allowed you to move to a completely different location within the world in relation to something you were and are still talented in relation to creativity, either art or singing or music? And she confirmed that yes, she moved house in 2003 and signed a music contract in relation to her ability to sing. All right, see what I mean? That's it. Important to understand geometry of the planets. Now, this was done live with no software, no ephemeris. Yeah, I say ephemeris because I'm from the Caribbean. I don't say ephemeris, I say ephemeris. Yeah. Now, had I had to open up astrological software, first it will just take so much time to open up the software, and then you have to load it up, then you have to calculate what the ascendant is, and then you have to look at what the planets are doing at during particular years, and then the computer, the software, is speaking the language of geometry, not you, the astrologer. Far as KhemAstroMath is concerned, the astrologer must be speaking the language of geometry, because when you can speak the language of the speaker of that language, you can understand what the speaker is getting across without the essence being lost. Yeah, so that's just a short talk, a short lecture that I gave just now, and natal chart rectification and a planetary Yamsheyan, and the importance of understanding and being able to speak the language of geometry. Yeah, very important. Knowing this geometry can greatly aid advanced studies, especially when it comes to being able to predict events down to the year, month, week, day, hour, minute, and second. And it is possible to do that. Don't let anybody fool you into believing that you cannot calculate down to the hour, minute, and second, because you can. I've seen it multiple times, and I've done it multiple times. But it's not something you can just do, and it's not something you can learn as a result of reading. You can read every single ancient text that is available on ancient astrology and still not know how to predict, because none of them books, from what I have seen, actually explain the process. And the ones that do explain it in such a cryptic manner that the astrologer would have to go out and carry out experimentation themselves in order to be able to find out how it actually works. For example, a lot of the ancient texts don't even explain the importance of not just direct circumambulation and primary directions, but also converse primary direction. A lot of the ancient texts don't even speak about the importance of that. You are expected to work this out for yourself. But anyway, that's another lecture for another time. KhemAstroMath-Prediction. I was here speaking about natal chart rectification and the planetary Yamsheyan while giving some examples and the importance of being able to speak the language of geometry, so you can speak directly with the planets rather than having to have a middleman, i.e. astrological software, to translate it for you. Yeah, I hope I provided some food for thought for those who are learning astrology, and those who want to teeth the technique and act like they came up with the technique themselves, those who want to steal the technique and act like they came up with the technique themselves. As I always say, you would know within yourself where you got the information from, and so will I. but I suspect the large majority of those who want to steal the technique would not want to take the time to learn the language of geometry, and they would rather use astrological software to carry out the same technique. But as long as the proficiency and efficiency of astrology and astrological practice is brought up to a higher standard, I don't really care. It would be nice if you would give me credit for things you have learnt from KhemAstroMath. But those of you who do not, what difference does it make? You're still going to do what you're going to do. Anyway, this is ThaBadbrey Herbalist Asar, ancient astrologer and astronomical mathematician at the Khemety of ancient astronomical mathematics, courtesy of ThaBadbrey Herbal, the code UK, Hokabanajum, Dendra.